Okay, let's get cracking. Welcome on board, everyone. I wanted to introduce, we've got two presenters today. We've got Andre, who's from the Runecast team, actually. He's the Senior Director, Channel Partnerships for APAC, and he is based in Melbourne. And we've got Yash.dole, who's a solution architect at Ingram Micro. He's part of the team that looks after virtualization and other cool technologies. I think first we're going to have Andre talking. I myself don't know much about Runecast, so it'll be an interesting session and something new to us all. Go ahead, Andre.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So, good morning, everyone. So, my name is Andre.carpenter, as Sean mentioned. I am part of Runecast, so I look after essentially the APAC region. We haven't actually done a lot in the APAC region, so we're sort of getting the message out there. We've been around since 2014, and we feel like we've got quite an exciting technology. And I'll tell you a little bit about where we came from and sort of where why we're relevant in today's market. So we were formed out of I guess a common business problem that we see in the software-defined data center. Maybe yourself, if you are a sysadmin or doing a lot in those VMware environments, you'll resonate with some of the problems that we saw, and those problems sort of spawned the reason why we formed Runecast. So present the business problem, and then also how we sort of address that. So Yash will take you through what it is we actually did. We do have a couple of screenshots that we wanted to share with you guys, because sometimes people just want to see the product, and obviously there's some really good case studies at the end where we've helped customers in their own software-defined data center to address those common problems I mentioned before. So if you ask yourself, how much time does your IT operations team spend on troubleshooting your environment, solving support tickets, looking for best practices to apply to the environment? Maybe it's a case of you're actually looking to ways to sort of secure your environment. Is your virtual data center actually as secure as it should be? Sorry, let's skip forward for some reason. What we actually found is, our founders were a bunch of sysadmin guys working in a managed services business. So they were the guys that actually had the task to go out and find the answers to a lot of those questions. And so they spent a lot of hours and hours and days coming. Oh, that's weird. It's like it keeps skipping forward. They actually spent a lot of hours, finding out those problems. This is weird. So it keeps moving by itself. So finding out a lot of solutions for those problems. And what they actually found is, once they got to the solution, that 90% of the issues that were out there and impacting their environment that they were managing were actually already documented by VMware. The challenge is that you only find out about those issues and the security patches and all the stuff that you should be doing after the fact. So after the environment had been impacted by an outage, or maybe it was a performance degradation. So what they wanted to do is flip that on its head and say, well, if all of that information is already publicly available, documented by VMware, and usually has a solution tied to it, why can't we flip it on its head and proactively leverage it? So if you take an example, and here's potentially 3 hosts or 30 hosts or 300 hosts, in those larger environments, those become a lot more difficult to manage. All of a sudden, you have 3 outages across a portion of those hosts, right? So again, the IT ops team, your sysadmin team, tasked with go and find out what went wrong, what kicked over those 3 hosts or those 30 hosts, and now you have to rely on them to trawl the thousands and thousands of knowledge base articles that VMware have released, as well as the security hardening guidelines. Maybe it wasn't a patch that you that should have been applied that actually knocked over your environment. Maybe it was a case of somebody found a particular security exploit, and they essentially gained unauthorized access to the environment and took your host down that way. Or maybe it was a best practices sort of guideline that your environment wasn't conforming to, So it wasn't actually performing as best as it could, and the workload just became a little bit too much for those hosts. I mentioned before, you only kind of find out about these things after it happens. So whilst you're waiting for your IT operations team to go through the thousands and thousands of articles and white papers and best practice guidelines out there, your service is impacted. So whether it's an outage or a performance degradation, there is that sort of outage happening in the background. And that's a big impact to any business. It's time consuming. You are relying on an IT operations team to get to the solution faster. And you are relying on how fast they can search, how fast they can click, type at the keyboard, etc., etc. It is reactive. A large portion of those examples that our founders saw was just simply patches that hadn't been applied to the environment. So you only find out about the relevant KB patch 6 months after it came out and after the outage had happened. So it's very inefficient for that human team to sort of trawl those knowledge base articles, and there are thousands of those, to actually look for the right patch for your environment. Trouble is, whether it's 3 hosts now or 30 hosts now that might have been impacted by that particular bug in the software, you're not actually looking at the other 97 hosts in the environment. You're only looking at the ones that are actually impacted. So where's your other host might be working today, tomorrow might be a different story. Tomorrow a portion of those might go down due to another patch. So there are other unknown issues that could be susceptible to your environment. So now we take the concept of, well, hang on, like all the solutions and the patches are already publicly there. So how do I gain access proactively to those? I think last time I checked, there's potentially 37,000 known issues from VMware, and they're constantly updating those. So every time they release a new update or a new version of vSphere, there's going to be a sort of an influx of new KB articles and security exploits that you need to abide by to make sure your environment's secure and up to speed. Staying across those thousands and thousands of articles is humanly, it's almost impossible. It's a full-time job, and we have a really good case study at the end of this. That, customer actually used our technology to free up a lot of their IT operations team to work on more innovative products. Best practices, again, hundreds and hundreds of best practices that VMware recommend for virtual environments that to really maximize the performance out of those, as well as logs. If you think about your own service stack, and typically it's made up of different hardware vendors and or ESXi versions. So you might be running it's a combination of XI, 6.5, 6.7, 7.0 has just come out. So actually having a different combination from a software perspective, as well as on different server vendors, really means that you've got a lot of sort of moving cogs in the environment. So finding the right sort of patches or relevant to that environment is actually quite time consuming. Over to you, Yash.
Right. Thanks, Andre. All right. So all those problems that Andre mentioned, in those previous slides, such as 37,000 plus known issues, all those logs, how you can miss out any problems with those remaining 97 hosts that he mentioned in his example, all those problems that you typically face in a software-defined data center, Runecast just turns it over its head. So what Runecast does, it proactively identifies the cause of the issues before they occur, and then they provide you the solution to remediate those problems. So proactive management is the key here. So what it does, it scans your entire environment, your vSphere, your vSAN, NSX, Horizon, all those environments against those knowledge base articles, best practices guides, security hardening guides, and also compliance standards. So it does the constant analysis of your entire configuration on those environments, and then correlates that against those KBs, those best practices and other guides. So if there is any known issue that is already mentioned in a KB article, and with a solution to that problem, and your environment hasn't implemented that, then it will flag that. Okay, so it will tell you which objects in your environment are affected by it. It will give you complete information from that knowledge base article, such as the symptoms, the cause, the solution, right there in that same dashboard. So I've got everything available to you right in that one screen. And it will also categorize such issues based on the severity level. So you as an administrator, can focus more on the critical problems first. Also, at the same time, logs are also correlated and analyzed in real time and compared them against those knowledge base articles. So if it detects some problematic logs, it can notify the administrator instantly. And again, you have similar information about, available for administrators, like which objects are generated that log, what time, how critical that log entry is, etc., etc. So, and also the related KB article, which proposed a solution to remediate that problem. So again, all available in that same dashboard. Also on top of that, it automates the security compliance checks against standards such as HIPAA, PCI, CIS, etc. So based on the information it receives by analyzing your complete environment, it can pinpoint which compliance configuration your environment fails to adhere to. So which objects are affected by it, and what is the solution by even referencing the documentation provided by those standards. So all in all, administrators can pick up any misconfigurations or any problems whatsoever in your environment before they start causing any big troubles for you. Okay. So, so how does Runecast does it? It's the same environment that Andre was talking about before, but Runecast sits inside your environment as a virtual machine. Okay, and it feeds on the knowledge base articles, the security hardening guides, the white papers, best practices, and constantly keep scanning your environment. Okay, so you can see that it is looking through all of those and keep scanning your environment all the time and every time. Okay, all right. So there are a number of benefits by using this approach, and most important of all is the proactive management. Okay, it can tell you about those potential issues before that are there in your entire environment, in your configuration. It could be your misconfiguration, it could be non-compliance, it could be some compatibility issue between different hardware and software that you're using. All this can be captured before that start causing any problems. And while it scans your network, no services are affected by it because it is not interfering with anything. It is just collecting information about your environment. So it is not causing any downtime or any such things. Okay. While it goes through its business, it is extremely fast and extremely efficient. Okay. And it can address all known issues. So Andre already mentioned that there are so many issues that are already known to VMware. So it can address all those known issues that are already been captured and in those knowledge base articles and in the best practices guides. And it can address your entire environment. I have mentioned this already, your vSphere, your vSAN, NSX Horizon, your complete environment. Okay. So it is very easy to deploy. If you look at it, it's just 1 GB file available in OVA format, and it only takes 5 minutes to deploy. Okay, so and then it will just connect to your vCenter, and it will start analyzing in minutes. Okay, so once it starts analyzing, like I mentioned before, it starts getting proactive detection of all known issues and recommendations. It automates the security compliance with industry standards. So overall, you don't need to have any subject matter experts in your team and get them to verify each and every single thing in your environment. And all this complexity is gone, and all the relevant information is available to you at your fingertips. Okay. So what are the business benefits that you can get out of this? So it can save time in troubleshooting. That's a big one, because if you have identified problems beforehand, there's less troubleshooting, less health checking, and all these activities are generally very time consuming. So it can save a lot of time there. Also, because of that, it can reduce any outages that can be caused by those problems or any hidden problems. Improving security and minimizing risk by making sure your environment is always compliant with the security standards and always adhering to the best practices. And all this eventually will translate to monetary benefits by reducing the cost, because we all know how much damage an outage can cause to your business overall. So by being proactive and by eliminating all those problems beforehand, you can have huge cost benefits to any organization. Okay.
Thank you, Yash.
Fine. So
this is the first dashboard. When you log into the appliance, this is the first one that you met with. And right away, you can actually see how well your own environment is conforming to these various components. So if we take security compliance, so maybe you're a government entity that needs to align to a particular third party or industry security framework. Since all of this information is built in, the KB articles are built in, the security guidelines is actually built in, the best practices, all those kind of policies are actually built into the appliance. It can actually scan that environment really, really quickly. And it can actually inform you whether or not you're actually conforming to that security regulation that you need to be. So if you have a customer, or you are a customer that may be having an upcoming security audit, here's a really quick way to check your whole environment. So remember, we spoke about those 3 hosts or 30 hosts in your environment. And they can check the whole 100 hosts, if it may be that, against that particular security compliance framework, right? And same thing from a knowledge base articles. So checking your whole environment and seeing if there's actually any applicable KB articles that you should be patching. Rather than finding out 6 months later and after an outage, you can actually proactively start planning for that and getting your IT operations team to execute this. Whilst this, identifies, finds, and discovers the right KB articles and patches to apply to your environment, it actually also gives you a solution recommended by VMware. It doesn't actually carry out the remediation of that, that particular patch. But simply speaking, getting to that solution, or getting to finding out what those KB articles are and what are the holes in your environment that you need to patch before you sort of meet that security audit, is that massive time consumption process that we have seen in other customer environments. And that is a common problem today in the software-defined data center, because it is made up of hundreds of hosts of different hardware makeups and different DNAs and combinations, right? So if we drill down, so from that previous dashboard, you can drill down into any one of those areas. Here's typically the first one that you'd go to. So you'd actually go to see what are the most critical issues that could be impactful to your environment, and what is the solution around that. So down the bottom there, you see what that list looks like, and then you see a little number along the right hand side. So that is actually the knowledge base article number, as opposed from, as recommended by VMware. The cool thing here is, if you do have a lot of issues in your environment and you have set out to start remedying those, you can actually compare with previous results. So you can actually see over a 30-day time frame, how your number of issues are, well, hopefully reducing and not increasing. But can actually see what sort of change on that front. So you can actually start showing value of this tool back to the business, because you can actually say we're now starting to get on top of those issues or potential issues that could be impacting the environment. Security hardening. So it's not just about staying on top of the patches that could knock out your environment. There's a large amount of rules and guidelines and best practices from VMware that they say in order to harden your environment from external parties who are trying to get in unauthorized access. These are recommendations that we think you should apply. So being able to get to those and identify those a lot faster than what your IT operations team is a huge time saver. Yes, do you want to speak through this one?
Yep, sure. That's HCL1. Yep. Sure. So the hardware compatibility list, that's actually one of the very important features of the Runecast solution, if you look at it. Because if you go to hardware compatibility tab on the left-hand side, it can give you some detailed information about the current hardware status in terms of the CPU, the BIOS, the input-output devices, everything, and also whether that's compatible or not. If you look at the next slide, that will give you a bit of a clarity around that. So this can also simulate. So let's say you're upgrading from ESXi 6 to ESXi 7 version, and you want to see what hardware that I have got that needs upgrading. So you can actually simulate that environment, and then it will give you a result out of saying that any particular object, and if that object contains, let's say, a NIC which is running a wrong type of firmware which is not compatible with that latest ESXi 7 release that you're talking about, then obviously it will flag that issue. So you can take such actions beforehand. By doing this, you have got the complete visibility of all objects in your complete environment that could cause potential issues. So if you do not have this information, and if you go through your upgrade process, you may experience some problems afterwards, and you may have to roll back, and that will be just a waste of time. So rather than doing that, you can use this tool to simulate that environment, see what's compatible, what needs upgrading, and take those actions beforehand, and then make the change in the real environment.
Yep, and then qualifying the environment is a very mundane task. Typically, you have to go, since we have that HCL built into the appliance, this can actually check your whole environment and to Yash's point, tell you exactly what you need to update before you actually pull the trigger on going to that next version of vSphere. Simply speaking, if you do raise a support case with VMware, the first thing they're going to ask is, are you meeting current support matrices? And if the answer is no, then they're going to tell you to go and remediate that and then call them back. So lastly, this is, maybe you're an MSP or a customer that looks after multiple virtual environments or VMware environments. This is essentially a multi-tenant view on a 30,000-foot view across all of your virtual environments. So you can actually see very quickly, how many critical issues could be hitting those environments or potential issues. You can see what environments align to particular best practices, as well as security compliance frameworks. So a really good way to gain that sort of high-level view over multiple environments. The good thing here is that you can actually drill down. So if you do identify an environment that you need to do a bit more research in, you can actually, from here, you can actually click on that environment and get direct access into that the initial dashboard that we showed you. So here's that example I spoke about at the beginning of this presentation, where a customer essentially had a multitude of errors and issues in their environment, and they were finding themselves constantly firefighting, constantly looking out for patches that would potentially knock out their environment. It really was a reactive sort of operations that they had going. What they did is essentially dropped our appliance into the environment, and within 2 weeks, they actually identified 10 critical issues that had the potential to cause a major outage across their business. Being that they serve 400 million customers, they're an e-retail shop. Their virtual environments was actually critical in terms of keeping their business online, right? What they found is, since you now have this little appliance working in your environment and proactively identifying those issues, they actually freed up 1 or 2 of their own IT operations members to redeploy to actually more innovative and exciting projects. So reducing those number of problems by 80% was a huge impact and really positive ROI on going with Runecast. Another customer, same story. So they had a pretty substantial environment, 24 vCenters managing approximately 750 hosts, probably made up of the different hardware vendors as well as versions of vSphere. So now they were constantly trying to stay on top of those, make sure they're up to a particular patch level, best practices. They didn't typically proactively go out and find the best practices relevant for their environment to implement those. They were just really focused on keeping the lights on. These guys saw a demo of our appliance and immediately purchased it the next day because they saw, you know, how much time they were spending in that environment. And you know, that goes back to that question that I asked at the beginning. You know, how much time is your IT operations team, you know, reactively trying to stay on top of those patches and best practices and security compliance frameworks, right? They had us up and running in about 15 minutes, and immediately, you know, since it efficiently and can have all that stuff built in, the HCLs, the KB articles, the best practices, since that's all built in, they could actually get results out of this and identify really critical issues, you know, that could knock out their environment within sort of 10 to 15 minutes. Lastly, so this is a cloud service provider. Again, they were in a bit of better spot than the two former cases, but they knew they weren't aligning to best practices. They knew they weren't getting the most out of their environment. So they leveraged our appliance, which has those best practices built in, to really identify, you know, what are the ones that are really going to make that impact, really going to improve their service to their customer. Once they started to align to, you know, VMware's best practices recommendations, they actually saw a massive increase in performance and even management of that virtual environment. You know, that made things a lot easier for their team. I think that's it. So if you have any questions, or you do want to see a demo, or you want to see a little bit more on this, then please feel free to reach out to myself, Adam and Yash at the Ingram Micro team. Alternatively, you know, we do offer a 14-day limited trial, and sometimes that's the best way to, you know, see the value within your own environment. Thank you.
Is there a certification program or training that needs to be done before Runecast can be sold to customers?
Good question. No, at the moment we're looking for the right type of partners. We pride ourselves in our software being quite easy to sort of to learn and to drive. Being that we can sort of implement it in 10 minutes, and yeah, the management of the actual GUI is quite straightforward. There isn't a formal certification today, but you know, that might change in the next year or two.
Okay, sounds good. We'll make sure your contact details are on the video when it is uploaded.